Has its origins in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries, mainly in Europe and North America, and is characterized by a self-conscious break with traditional ways of writing in both poetry and prose fiction. Modernists experimented with literary form and expression, adhering to Ezra Pound's maxim to make it new. This literary movement was driven by a conscious desire to overturn traditional modes of representation and express the new sensibilities of their time. The horrors of the First World War saw the prevailing assumptions about society reassessed, and modernist writers were influenced by such thinkers as Sigmund Freud and Karl Marx, amongst others, who raised questions about the rationality of the human mind.
The next modernist literary movement was driven by a conscious desire to overturn traditional models of representation and express of the new sensibilities of their time. It is debatable when the modernist literary movement began, though some have chosen 1910 as roughly marking the beginning, and quote novelist Virginia Woolf, who declared that human nature underwent a fundamental change on or about December 1910. But modernism was already stirring by 1988 with works such as Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness, while Alfred Jarry's absurd play Ubi Roy appeared even early in 1896. Clement Greenberg sees modernism ending in 1930s with the exceptions of the visual and performing arts. In fact, many literary modernists lived into the 1950s and 1960s, though generally speaking, they were no longer producing major works. The term late modernism is also something applied to modernist works published after 1930. Among modernism or late modernists still publishing after 1941-45 were Pallas Stevens, Gottfried Benn, Thomas Eliot, Anna Akhmatova, William Faulkner, Dorothy Richardson, and John Cowper Paulus, and Ezra Pound.
The main characteristics of modernist literature. Individualism. In modernist literature, the individual is more interesting than society. Specifically, modernist writers were fascinated with how the individual adapted to the changing world. Writers presented the world of society as a challenge to the integrity of their characters. Experimentation. Modernist writers broke free of old forms and techniques. Poets abandoned traditional rhyme schemes and wrote in free verse. Writers mixed images from the past with modern languages and themes, creating a collage of styles. Absurdity. The carnage of two world wars profoundly affected the writers of the period. Several great English poets died or were wounded of First World War. At the same time, global capitalism was reorganizing society at every level. For many writers, the world was becoming a more absurd place every day. Symbolism. The modernist writers infused objects, people, places, and events with significant meanings. They imagined a reality with multiple layers, many of them hidden or in a sort of code. Symbolism was not a new concept in literature, but the modernist particular use of symbols was an innovation. And the last is formalism. Writers of the modernist period saw literature more as a craft than a flowering of creativity. The idea of literature as craft fed the modernist desire for creativity and originality. Modernist poetry often includes foreign languages, dense vocabulary, and invented words.
Modernist literature after 1939. Though the Oxford Encyclopedia of British Literature see modernism in ending by the 1939 with regard to British and American literature, when modernism petered out and postmodernism began has been contested almost as hotly as when the transition from Victorianism to modernism occurred. And to the late modernism, here are some of the name of the writer of this time after 1945. They are Wallace Stevens, Gottfried Benn, T.S. Eliot, Anna Akhmatova, William Faulkner, John Copepoise, and Ezra Pound. More recently, the term late modernism has been redefined by at least one critic and used to refer work written after 1945 rather than 1930. With this usage goes the idea that the ideology of modernism was significantly reshaped by the event of World War II, that's the Second World War. And now we are going to present you a video of modernism in literature. Modernism literature was a predominantly English genre of fiction writing, popular from roughly the 1910 into the 1960s. The period is marked by a sudden and unexpected break with traditional ways of viewing with the world. Modernist literature came into its own due to the increasing industrialization and globalization after the horror of the First World War. Yeah, many modernists experimented with literary form and expression adhering to Ezra Pound's maxim to make it new. If you read the book of writing style, modernist writers were well known for using a stream of consciousness style of writing. Most modernist fiction were cast in first person. Yeah, and James Joyce from Dublin, Ireland. His most experimental and famous work, Ulysses, completely abandoned generally accepted notion of plot, setting, and character. Where earlier smooth literature had a clear beginning, middle, and end, the modernist story were often more of a stream consciousness. For the first time modernist reader, this can all add up to feel like the story is going nowhere. Yeah, and there is one more video.
American modernism has its origins in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, during which time a series of changes were taking place that would ultimately lead to the transformation of the American way of thinking. Before we can understand the literary significance behind this time in our history, it's important for us to realize what was happening to the world in the early 20th century. World War I was probably the event that introduced the beginning of all this change. Even though America came out on the victor's side, the country seemed to have lost its innocence. The idealism from the previous century began turning into cynicism.